Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Game Mess. So, taking some super fun and exciting MAME update news for you guys today, and one that in particular is going to be very exciting for me personally, because if you know me and you know the channel, you know I love a good light gun game, and you know I love the Time Crisis franchise. That is because for the longest time, Crisis Zone just did not work on Namco System 23 emulation. You could get into the game, but it had two fundamental problems. One, it would never run at full speed, and two, the overall control input and accuracy was just completely off. And that is not a knock on the MAME emulation in any way, shape, or form. This is very difficult stuff to accomplish, but as of today, on a commit that has a build artifact, you can play Crisis Zone from start to finish in MAME, and it is absolutely outstanding. And honestly, video game emulation is always video game preservation, and because the Namco System 23 version of this game differs from the actual PlayStation 2 release, both graphically as well in some content, it is definitely an important thing to have today. Before we get too far involved though, do me a huge favor down below, hit like and subscribe and ring that notification bell, definitely helps us out. And if you feel so inclined and want to support the channel, I got a Patreon link down below as well. And right off the top, the most impressive thing about Crisis Zone, other than the fact that it now works in MAME, is just how much of the environment is actually destructible. You will see everything flying in as you shoot things, books are going to shred into pieces of paper, televisions are going to shatter, and everything else in the environment is just up for your demolition. And when that came out in arcades, it was absolutely impressive, and maybe even more so when it came over to PlayStation 2. But honestly, the original Namco System 23 aesthetic is absolutely a vibe, and even if the PlayStation 2 version is technically graphically superior, I want to play the Namco System 23 version all day every day in comparison. But you leave me a comment down below and you tell me, Namco System 23 or PlayStation 2, I would be very curious to hear what you guys think. And honestly, there really isn't a wrong answer to this question. It's all down to your personal aesthetic and to your vibe. But for me, Namco System 23 with a slightly chunkier polygons and a little bit more pixelation just has a little bit of a grittier feel to it. The last time I talked about this game, I showed you that the control would work, but it was basically highly misaligned. I think it was down to the bottom right, maybe about half of a screen. So you could get into the game and you could start it up, you really couldn't get it to run at full speed, and your aim was off. And in a light gun game, that is definitely something that you need to have 100% buttoned up, because if you can't play the game correctly, it's not really going to be quote-unquote fun. Because even if MAME is first and foremost a preservation project, the games have to be fun or else it's not really going to matter. And as long as you have a beefy enough CPU to bring to the party, you'll be having a ton of fun here. And just so you know, in case you forgot, MAME does absolutely nothing with your GPU. Every single bit of silicon being emulated here for the Namco System 23 is going to be going through your CPU, so you want to have a very performant single core, basically the best you can bring to the party. A big thanks to SpaceRock12 for helping with the capture on this one of the best members of my Discord. I left a link to his channel down below as well, so go pump up his subscription numbers. I tested this in the background on my i9-12900K, overclocked to 5.4 GHz, and I was able to get full speed. SpaceRock12 used a Ryzen 9 7900X3D and also got full speed. But if you bring something like an i5 4690K or something like that to the party, you're not going to be able to run this one at 100% frame rate, so you might have to go to frame skip. But that really is the thing. Namco System 23 is very advanced hardware, and emulating it's going to require a decent CPU in your rig. You don't need to have the most impressive battle station ever made, but you just can't bring something like 10 years old to the party and expect good results. But the fact that this even works as good as it did, honestly, is hyper impressive. Every once in a while you might see a slight visual glitch, but for the most part this feels like 99% buttoned up, and that absolutely makes a difference because unless you know where there is a Crisis Zone cabinet out in the wild, if you play the PlayStation 2 version of the game you are not experiencing the arcade original, because again, completely different hardware. And honestly, Time Crisis has a very interesting kind of release schedule. The original game gets ported down to PlayStation 1, Time Crisis 2 gets ported up to PlayStation 2 along with Crisis Zone, and then one of the other Time Crisis games, 4, goes from PlayStation 2 arcade hardware to PlayStation 3 home hardware. It really does love to bounce around, but now we basically have every single Time Crisis game 100% emulatable from the arcade on PC, and damn it, that is a fun time. Let's do the first of two soundtrack samples so you can hear the audio quality. I'll be right back to talk more about why this matters and what's coming next.
Action! action!
I mean, that sounds like Crisis Zone to me, but honestly, the bullet sound effect is going to overwhelm the music basically everywhere, and that's because the game designers decided that's what they wanted to emphasize. So really, it is more of a sound effect sample than anything else. But this isn't just important for something like Namco System 23 emulation, even though it is hugely important for that. It is also important for the Time Crisis arcade franchise in general. Every single Time Crisis arcade release on its original hardware is now 100% able to be emulated from start to finish, so long as you have the hardware to do so. And that is absolutely fundamentally a really big milestone, because as much as Crisis Zone is fun on PlayStation 2, it just lacks the gritty original aesthetic of the game that you're seeing here, and honestly that's something that I think is to the detriment of the game. Especially that skybox in the background is so much more dramatic here on Namco System 23 hardware than it ever was on PlayStation 2. And that is why I always say video game emulation is video game preservation, because I haven't seen a Crisis Zone cabinet now for probably 5 or 6 years. I'm not even sure if I wanted to get in my car and drive a couple hours if I would ever even be able to hit one. And that is why all the improvements in Namco System 23 we've been seeing in like the last 12 months are 100% fundamentally important to the history of video games, because this was not a rare game back in the day. It was a successful game, but there's tons of Namco System 23 games that weren't as successful and now are all but extinct in arcades. So MAME developers going in and making sure these games are playable for everyone for all time really is going to keep the dream alive. And the best part is when you have a game as fun as Crisis Zone, you really are doing double duty both in preservation and just straight up having a good time. Because I would say this is probably my favorite Time Crisis game, at least this year, because I've been playing around with it. It is absolutely over the top. It's everything you want out of a late gun game. Nothing more and nothing less. And the Namco System 23 hardware is exceedingly a pain in the ass to actually collect for. I have 2 boards in my closet. They're absolutely massive, and they take forever to set up if you're in a cabinet or if you're doing it via a custom supergun setup. And more often than not, if I want to play the games, if they do emulate, I just go straight to emulation and don't really bother actually trying to hook my boards up anymore, because for a game that you might play for 30 minutes, it can sometimes take an hour to actually get these things set up in front of you, running controllable and ready to play. And for people with way more common sense than I have who don't have closets filled with these massive boards, this is going to make the game that much easier to play and enjoy. And that is why this is probably tied with actually PCSX 2X6 getting the Namco System 246 and 256 emulators working is some of my favorite emulation improvements in the last 12 months. And interestingly enough, it all has to do with Namco all the same, because honestly, a lot of the Sega hardware is completely buttoned up or very close to this point in time, but Namco System 23 was kind of that last board where not every single game ran correctly. And it is still going to be that case. Other games like Gunman War, still not 100% playable yet, but hopefully we'll see that maybe by the end of the year or maybe by this time next year. Because there's some games out there that you probably never heard of before that ran on this really fun hardware, and it really is Namco's last custom in-house board before they go over to using console designs. But let's do one more soundtrack sample, because again, the music in this game is straight up amazing, and I'll be right back with just a little bit more.
Reload! Reload!
I mean, again, more of a sound effect simulator than anything else, but you get the idea that the Namco System 23 audio emulation is doing an exceptional job. And honestly, going through the entirety of the game, it's really hard to point to anything that isn't working correctly. I saw a couple texture glitches here and there, but otherwise, this feels extremely mature, and it definitely is something. So long as you have the right CPU speed and the right generation, you're going to be able to sit down and have fun with today. But again, I want to remind you, you have to have a good CPU here, because my i9-12900K overclocked to 5.4 GHz was absolutely making the radiator fans spin about as hard as they possibly could for something that is running on emulation. That's just because MAME only utilizes that CPU, and for something like this, you need a really strong single core with a recent architecture behind it, or it's just not going to be able to achieve those results. But if you have that, if you love a good light gun game, you've been waiting for Crisis Zone to be able to actually run in MAME, that day is here today, so long as you go to the GitHub commits and download the artifact. My guess would be it'll be built into the next version of MAME, but if you want to test it today, you totally can do so. Short of that, we're done. Hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.